Thank you, everyone, for joining us for your dose of Weekly Whiskey with John and Jay. We have a really cool episode here, but first I want to go ahead and thank a sponsor. Mackie is our audio partner for this series. We really like all the gear that they have brought to us. It is making us sound awesome. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into a cool interview that we've been looking forward to. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm excited to talk a little bit about a whole variety of brands tonight. This should be a pretty interesting episode right from the get-go.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Matti. Matti is from Grain & Barrel, which is a brand you may have heard of, but probably not, but you've definitely heard of their sub-brands. So let's go ahead and welcome you on in. You know, Chicken Cock Whiskey is one that's really kind of taking the market by storm, and you guys are using that momentum to grow into other spaces. But I'm curious, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm curious to hear about how you came to start Grain & Barrel.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me on tonight. Excited to be part of the show and tell our story. Brand story, company story, personal story. So it's been quite the journey. So I've been in the spirit space for now at about 15 years. Before that, I was in finance, and right out of college, I think I watched Wall Street too many times as a kid. So wanted to be an investment banker, be Gordon Gekko.
Nice.
So I was doing that after college and kind of got lucky to be put on some deals down in Brazil. So spent quite a bit of time in my early 20s in Brazil, and then decided that maybe I didn't want to be an investment banker the rest of my life.
Okay.
I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial and create something, right? And so I ended up creating a brand called Cabana Cachaça. So it's a Brazilian rum, pure cane rum. Launched that in 2006, and didn't know anything about the space, but was in my mid-20s. Thought it'd be cool to have a spirits company or brand, and really learn the business from the ground up. Cachaça as a category never really took off. No one could pronounce it. No one could pronounce caipirinhas. And quickly realized that, if I was going to have, a real career in this industry, that I needed to start really thinking about, more brands and really thinking about, not just stuff that I would think is kind of cool, but, what really consumers would need and want, right? Where there was some white space out there. And so that's kind of what led to the creation of Grain & Barrel. The idea was to identify emerging trends in the spirit space, and then either create, resurrect, or in certain situations acquire brands to take advantage of those trends. But what we really, our goal is, while everything works together as a portfolio, all the brands need to be able to stand alone and really be able to articulate individual brand stories and reasons for existing. And that's what we do. We really focus on creating really unique, compelling brands that are beautiful and delicious. And each one has a little bit of a different, story to it. Some are super old, like Chicken Cock, that we've brought back to life. Some are, kind of in the shower aha moments, like Dixie Vodka. And then some, like Elvis Whiskey, are opportunities that came to us, that we saw a lot of, potential in and have had fun bringing to life, but around something that's already truly iconic. So each one's a little bit different, but that's, for me as the founder and CEO of Grain & Barrel, what I love to do is I love to create brands. And I love to see those creations come to life. And see them on the store shelf or in a bar, and people really enjoying those brands, and then really facilitating their growth and success. And so we've had a lot of fun. We're out of Charleston, South Carolina is where we're headquartered. But depending on the brand, we produce all around the country, and we've got great production partners.
What's your, prior to Grain & Barrel, what would have been your brand? Like, what got you into whiskey or spirits in general, but then find a way to shape it to whiskey so that way we can hear about your favorite whiskeys?
Yeah, I mean, prior to really getting into the space, I was also, when I got into the industry, I was, in my early 20s. So probably what I was drinking in my early 20s is not what I would be drinking today.
Sure.
But I always liked some of the iconic brands like Jack Daniels and brands like that. My grandfather was a big Jim Beam fan, so kind of memories of that growing up. So I've always loved like the Tennessee and Kentucky whiskeys, and so that's really where kind of my foundation was from a whiskey standpoint. So if you look at kind of how we've developed our whiskey side of the portfolio and really generally our overall brands, it's always been very American focused, and really bringing to life those kind of iconic spirits, in the United States, and really working on a very kind of local, regional level as we build out these brands. So, and I'm also just a huge fan of Kentucky in particular. So that was it was a lot of fun, the process of resurrecting the Chicken Cock brand, because I don't know if there are more beautiful places on a bright, sunny spring day than some of those rolling hills of Kentucky. So
one of my favorite places to be in the spring is Kentucky. I love being there as much as possible. But I am curious, we've covered Chicken Cock in the past. We have had the absolute pleasure of having Greg Snyder on before. We can and we have and we will continue to talk to him all night long again. Those are the interviews we seem to cut the most out of, because we look at it and we're like, oh, it was great to talk to him for 2 hours. Really, always really good. But when you kind of pivoted on over to the world of whiskey and you're bringing up a new brand, I'm curious what you think is the most interesting part of reviving an old brand, and then also what's the biggest hurdle that you kind of didn't expect?
Whiskey's great, but it also has its particular challenges, and especially depending on how you go about it. But having people like Greg Snyder on our team is amazing, because he's a wealth of knowledge. I mean, just tons and tons of experience, and he's seen the business from every angle possible. And yeah, he'll talk whiskey and bourbon, for hours and hours and hours, and he really lives it. And so, one of the most important things is having people like that, around who really understand it and who have the experience to enable phenomenal products to come to market from a liquid standpoint. And working with amazing partners from West Virginia Great Barrel Company, who's making our barrels, to Bardstown Bourbon Company, to so that's been a real asset and key component of our journey in the whiskey space is the people and the partners that we're working with. I think that the challenge with a brand like Chicken Cock is it has such a rich history to it. And it's about bringing that to life in the 21st century, while still paying homage to that history, but making it relevant today. Right? It's not just about, hey, this is what was done before, so we're just going to do this, kind of try and do the same thing 100 years later. But it's like you tap into that, but do it in a way that we're putting our own, imprint on the brand. And that's been a journey. And it's been a lot of fun. It's had its challenges, I think, in whiskey, especially in whiskey in the very high end, when you're really focused on the best quality that you can, and still having like a sustainable business is, there's not a ton of whiskey out there, right? And it takes a long time when you're laying down your own liquid and you're waiting years for it to mature. That's a challenge, right? Where vodka's great because it's just like turn on a spigot, right? And you don't have to wait.
Yeah, I could dig that. You touched on something there that kind of sparked something in my mind. So you mentioned the limited edition stuff. I immediately think of what you've done with Chicken Cock and some of the limited releases that you've done there. When I heard about the Elvis Whiskey, I imagined that to be something that would be along the same vein, a ultra age expression that was going to tap into that limited edition market, especially with something named after the king. And It's actually kind of the opposite. It's much more budget focused. Do you want to touch on that and sort of dive into the branding choices and sort of how you decided to build the brand that way?
With Elvis, what we wanted to do is we wanted to come to market with a couple core SKUs that we could have confidence that could be kind of a consistent in the marketplace. especially as we kind of started talking to some of our distributors and key retail partners and kind of socializing the idea of Elvis whiskey. The excitement around it was significant. I mean, people were like, "Yeah, Elvis whiskey, heck yeah! Like let's do that." And so said, "Okay." And then from there we knew almost immediately that we wanted to do a Tennessee whiskey for Elvis and really kind of go back to the Tennessee roots of Elvis as an iconic person and just his history there. And we have a very close relationship with Graceland, and so part of that process is like, how do we come out with initial couple products that we feel like we can keep consistently in the market, right? And so the Tennessee whiskey and the rye that we launched that's kind of what I would call the foundation of the brand. And then from there, the plan is to layer on, like we've done with Chicken Cock, really interesting limited releases, collaborations. I mean, almost immediately after we launched, which has only been the last couple months, we've had a lot of people reach out to us for collaborations. And that's the fun part for me in the whiskey space, particularly because you do have this level of creativity that you can tap into, which is a little bit difficult in other categories. I love doing different barrel finishes. I love, kind of doing different mash bills and playing around with that kind of stuff. And people like Greg on our team, are phenomenal at pulling all that together. They have much better palates than I could ever hope to have. And so, that's going to be a huge part of the Elvis whiskey story, similar to what we've done with Chicken Cock. Yeah. So it's you have to have kind of like the everyday, kind of like what we've done with Kentucky Straight Bourbon and our Kentucky Straight Rye on the Chicken Cock side. Our goal, as much as possible, is to have those be available, every day to our distributor partners. Unfortunately, our limited releases it's a different story.
Right.
Not everyone's going to be able to get it. Once it's done, it's done. But always want to have that brand, available in the marketplace in some form or fashion.
Sure. That makes sense. And I always do think it's interesting when people complain like, oh man, I had a really hard time finding this limited release. And I'm like, if you could just find it anywhere and it was a limited release, when once you have doubted that. But I do want to touch on something you just talked about. So, obviously Elvis is a iconic, almost monolithic brand. It goes back, it's almost a fiber of kind of the American zeitgeist in history as well. But Elvis wasn't really known as a drinker. And in the cases that he did choose to drink, he didn't always, reflect the best experiences. And I'm really curious, how has that affected you guys actually building the branding and marketing for, an Elvis style whiskey? Is that incorporated any difficulty or wrinkles, or, have you had a pretty easy time bringing this to market and branding it in a way that people can really identify with?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's always interesting when you build a brand around an actual person, whether, dead or alive. I think Elvis is a unique one in that it's, one, he hasn't been with us for 44 years now, right? So he has he kind of has a different kind of place in popular culture, I think, than just the normal individual. And so I think for us, first off, we were approached by Authentic Brands Group that owns the Elvis Presley franchise. They in partnership with the family. And they were really looking to bring Elvis to life in some new categories, and they really wanted to do it in the spirit space. And one of the reasons why they reached out to us is one, I think we have a very good reputation in terms of developing brands, and with brands like Chicken Cock and what we've done on the whiskey side. But just generally our whole philosophy when it comes to how we think about why a brand should exist and bringing it to market, and our partners that we work with. And so what they didn't want with Elvis was to just have it be a line extension of a big existing brand, right? And they wanted it really to be, they were hoping at least for it to be its own brand, its own standalone brand. And so when we started kind of talking to them and really kind of digging into it, part of it was, Elvis's history in Tennessee and how that relates to kind of the whiskey space. Also, an interesting part of Elvis's story is his grandfather was actually a moonshiner. He distilled covertly on his own, which actually we found from the historian at Graceland. So there was a history of distilling in Elvis's family. He wasn't a huge drinker. He did like Bloody Marys. But as we all do. It was less about kind of what Elvis was specifically doing day to day in his life, and more of, how could we bring something to market that really connected. Initially that first wave is really connecting to Elvis fans, which I've been just blown away by, for someone who hasn't been around 44 years, right? How huge Elvis is. So, and like how the variety and the breadth of his fan base. I mean, we've people who are like, I love Elvis, and they were like nowhere close to being alive when Elvis was still alive, right? So, yeah. And we got a lot of people who are like, oh, this is great. It's two things I love is Elvis and whiskey. And it's like bringing them together in this beautiful, marriage. And I said, that's really part of, what we're trying to do. It's really kind of, going, and connecting with the Elvis fans in something that they can really enjoy at a very tangible and personal level. Whiskey's huge, right? People love whiskey. People love Elvis, and so it's really worked well together. And I think, what we've done, and we've worked really closely with, our partners on the Elvis side of it is, and particularly with Graceland, which they've been awesome, is how do we take what is a kind of huge kind of collection of assets around Elvis? I mean, we've got tons of imagery, the music, the videos, and all this stuff, and how do we really take the things that will reinforce, what we're trying to accomplish on the whiskey and really bring that to life. And so it's been a great collaborative effort on that front. And we've got great designers that, our designer out of Austin, Texas, who just totally gets, she's a huge Elvis fan. She totally gets the whole vibe. And she's had such a fun time with this project. And so that's what it is. It's really just bringing Elvis as this cultural icon, right, to life in a category that just, people love as well. And so, that's kind of how we've done it. So it's been less about, hey, was Elvis drinking whiskey every day, and was it's more of like, hey, Elvis whiskey, and I think for me, and this is how I look at it as the owner of Grain and Barrel, and when I think about brands is, the brands need to have a life of their own, right? So, Elvis whiskey needs to be a cool brand, whether it's Elvis, whether people know who Elvis is or not. The package needs to speak to them, the liquid needs to speak to them, the imagery needs to speak to them. And if they're Elvis fans, it's just icing on the cake.
It's hard to build a brand to begin with, but it's hard. A lot of these brands just kind of rise from being so connected to industry as it is, especially when people are, bringing back, oh, this was a distillery 100 years ago. Like that just naturally parlays into the whiskey world. So yeah. I think that's interesting. Now, did you guys did you have any marks for how you wanted to construct, the whiskey, the flavor profile? Was there something you were going on other than being, accessible and Elvis based? Like what led you to the end products that we got for both of the expressions in the Elvis line?
Yeah. So we knew we wanted Tennessee. I thought that was a really important part of the process for us from a liquid standpoint. It also is clear, chicken cock is, at the core is Kentucky, right? And so I wasn't going to say, hey, let's do Elvis and let's make it a Kentucky, bourbon. It
makes sense.
Because of Elvis's history in Tennessee, it just made sense for it to be a Tennessee whiskey, and then going through the process of also, laying down additional liquid in Tennessee and eventually, of the Tennessee whiskey and the Tennessee rye alongside each other. that was kind of a driving force of it initially from a production standpoint. And then we don't own a distillery in Tennessee, so then it was really a process of, hey, let's go and talk to the potential partners down there and see not just who can create a great product, but also who's really excited about this project. Who would be super pumped up to be able to work with us on Elvis Whiskey. And so, that was kind of the initial kind of the filter process. It was like, we're going to Tennessee, we're going to find a kick-ass partner to do this with, and then we've got an amazing team on our end who really knows what they're doing from the production side, and then they're going to work together to create a product that people are going to take. They might buy the first bottle because they're Elvis fans, but then once they crack it open and they try it, they're gonna go back again. And so there's the sticking power to it, where it's not just a novelty, but just buying this to put on my shelf because I'm an Elvis fan. And so, and then again, with what I was saying about what comes after this, and really creating these two SKUs as kind of the foundation, is what can we build off of these liquid profiles, right? From whether it's special barrel finishes or things like that really can be kind of building blocks to kind of what comes after. So that's an important part of how we think about the initial SKUs for any launch, particularly the ones that are going to be kind of the everyday items. And so and over time, especially because we've laid down a lot of our own whiskey for this, over time, it'll continue to age and they'll continue to mature, and that'll kind of evolve with the brand. But as a starting point, we're really excited and happy about where we able to launch, and then kind of what's going forward from that standpoint.
I like that. I also am really curious to see where you guys go with this. I mean, hopefully this turns into something where you can really capitalize on that major partnership with the Elvis Presley branding and stretch this into decanters, limited editions, higher age dated stuff. I think it'd be really fun.
There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of cool stuff on the whiteboard right now.
All right, let me know when you release like the jukebox decanter series, because I'm tentatively in.
There we go.
Your PR guy reached out and was like, "Hey, would you guys be interested in talking about Elvis whiskey?" And I read as far as Elvis, I was like, "Yeah, probably. Whatever this is, I probably do want to talk about that."
Yeah, well, we've seen. I mean, the reaction in the market. I mean, from an e-commerce standpoint, I mean, as soon as we released it just flowing. And then our distributor partners. I mean, I was looking at it earlier today. I mean, we initially launched in. It goes 8 markets that we initially launched in just to kind of test things out. And that was, in October. And almost every single one has reordered at least twice.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's
definitely turning, which has been fun.
That's an excellent segue. I was going to ask if, John and I get the opportunity and we have the privilege and honor to speak to tons and tons of brands. And some of them are like, our goal is to entice consumers to purchase once. This is a collectible. It's rare. It's interesting. There's a value proposition for a collector's perspective. And on the other side, people are like, we want people to buy this once, and then we want it to be the only whiskey they buy for the rest of forever until they want to try something new. And I was really curious if you guys were hedging on Elvis Collectors or people drinking, with an interest in Elvis. And so it really, I expected the collector answer, but it sounds like, you guys are really capturing that repeat purchase marketplace.
Yeah, I think for sure the person who's picking this up, initially on the shelf, they're probably inclined to like Elvis, right? And have some kind of affinity towards Elvis. But what we're seeing, and this has been, we're getting a lot of feedback from consumers as well. I mean, I'm a big, I've now launched, a number of brands. And so we kind of have a process to doing that. And consumer and trade feedback is super important. Because we can have, certain assumptions going into a launch, but, it's kind of like a kid. You raise them and then you release them into the wild. And, hopefully you give them a good foundation, but they're going to kind of find their own way in a lot of ways. So, and a brand's no different. And so you have to really listen to that feedback, say, oh, these assumptions were correct, these ones maybe weren't correct. And then you kind of adjust from there, right? And that makes a brand stronger. And so we listen a lot. And what we're hearing is people are like, package is cool. I love Elvis. I love whiskey. And man, it tastes good, And so I think that's the key, right? For the longevity of this brand is the liquid has to be good and it has to bring people back and ultimately get people to recommend it to friends. And then hopefully you have something that, can continue to expand in distribution. So, maybe it's not the only whiskey they're drinking, but it's a go-to, which is different than obviously our limited releases, unlike, especially on Chicken Cock. I mean, people are probably only going to get an opportunity to buy it once, right? Because, it'll go out, it'll sell out quickly and then it just doesn't come back, right? So, and for the collectors out there on that end, I mean, it's probably pretty hard for them to, crack some of those bottles and consume them right away because, they're not going to be able to get it again. So, but for our everyday bourbon and rye on the Chicken Cock line, hopefully, and a lot of people, it's their go-to. So, that's the nice thing on the whiskey side. Again, you can kind of, depending on the SKU, it can kind of serve different purposes.
Cool. I think that wraps up like our really heavy hitting questions, but I do want to ask, so if folks are interested, in the current Elvis whiskeys that exist, you guys have teased a little bit of brand expansion here, as well as, Chicken Cock whiskey is kind of known for having those shelf staples and also those really enticing, really heavy hitting limited editions. If people want to learn more about what you guys are doing at Grain and Barrel, if they're looking for more info on Elvis whiskey, where can they go ahead and find that?
Yeah, so, grainandbarrel.com is kind of the gateway, not the most exciting website in the world, but you can click through to the individual brands and the individual brand pages, get into the history. Chicken Cock in particular, because it has so much history, that's a great resource to really understand kind of where the brand came from, where it is today, and also be able to, locate it, whether it's, at traditional retail or online. We just launched our holiday release, our Cotton Club Rye, which is a 20-year-old Canadian rye that goes back to really tells the story, the Prohibition era story of the brand. And so that's kind of right now, that's what we're really kind of focusing on in terms of around the holidays. And that's been a lot of fun because it speaks to the history of the brand and that period of time when the brand was forced to go up to Canada, and then smuggle itself back into the US. And so that's been fun. And that's something that, probably be pretty hard to find at most stores. We're trying to kind of allocate it enough where, enough of our distributors will get a little piece of that, but, that's going to be heavily driven online, from our fan base. And then, Elvis, we're building out still a lot of the assets around that, but, ElvisWhiskey.com and, is kind of the gateway there too. And more information on where it's available, will be available. And then, over time, but Elvis again is also, and is particularly interesting because there is such a broad fan base around Elvis. We have seen the e-commerce piece on this brand really race out very quickly, much faster than we would normally see on a normal brand launch. So people are really going online. They're buying it. They're buying multiple bottles. They're gifting it. And so we've got, Elvis through our website, but then we also have it on Reserve Bar is a big partner of ours for Elvis. Okay. They've been doing great on it as well.
Very good. Matti, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time and to really kind of show us an awful lot about all of these brands that you guys are doing. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes than I would have initially thought. We know we've had a great time having Greg Snyder on the show and get to hear about Chicken Cock, but being able to really find out what else is under the umbrella has been really fun.
Yeah, no, it's been my pleasure. And I can't hold a candle to Greg when it comes to, the production side, but
not many can.
I do a good job, hopefully, of coming up with cool brands and leading the charge from the company level, and it's a lot of fun. So.